The bells of St. Winifred's chapel tolled through the pale morning fog, slow and somber, as though the heavens themselves already sensed sorrow. Inside, sunlight streamed through the stained glass, painting the marble floor in colors too bright for the moment that was coming. Guests whispered behind their lace fans. The air smelled of roses, incense, and expectation. At the altar stood Lady Marianne Ashcroft, a vision of trembling grace. Her gown, ivory satin stitched with silver thread, shimmered faintly whenever she moved. Her fingers clenched the small bouquet until her knuckles whitened. The clock in the nave struck the hour. Still, Lord Edmund Harrow, her betrothed, had not arrived. Her father, Baron Ashcroft, shifted uncomfortably in the first pew, his face tight with shame. The vicar glanced toward the great wooden doors, waiting for a man who would never appear. Whispers began to snake through the congregation, first cautious, then cruel. The Harrow heir, late to his own wedding? Perhaps he's changed his mind. Marianne stood very still. Her heart pounded against the silk bodice like a trapped bird. She told herself he would come. Edmund had promised her laughter and security, and escape from her family's debts. He had spoken of honor, of devotion. Surely a man who spoke so sweetly would not leave her standing here, alone. The moments stretched, the bells ceased. The silence grew unbearable. Someone coughed, someone else stifled a nervous laugh. The vicar cleared his throat. "My lady," he whispered, "shall we wait a little longer?" She opened her mouth to answer, but no sound emerged. Only then did she feel the first tear slip down her cheek. And then, just as the last shred of dignity began to crumble, another voice filled the chapel, deep, steady, and entirely unfamiliar. "If he will not take her hand," the voice said, cutting through the whispers like thunder, "then I will." Gasps rippled through the pews, heads turned. A man stepped forward from the back row. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his dark hair damp from the rain outside. His uniform, an officer's, bore the stains of travel and battle. A long scar cut across his left brow. He removed his gloves and bowed slightly toward the bewildered vicar. "My name is Captain William Drake," he said, voice quiet but certain. "No woman deserves humiliation for another man's cowardice. If it will restore her honor, I will stand in his place." Marianne stared, her lips parted in disbelief. She had never seen him before. Her father rose halfway to his feet, torn between outrage and relief. The guests murmured louder, scandal, madness, salvation, all tangled together. The vicar hesitated. "My lord, this is most irregular." Her father's voice broke through, hoarse but decisive. "Do it. Let the ceremony continue. The Ashcroft name will not be mocked." The captain turned toward Marianne then. His eyes, gray as the storm clouds, beyond the windows, met hers, and something inside her stilled. There was no pity there, only respect. "Lady Marianne," he said softly, "you owe me nothing. But if this spares you shame, allow me the privilege." Her bouquet trembled in her hands. Around them, the whispers swelled into astonished gasps, yet the chapel seemed to narrow until only the two of them remained, an abandoned bride and a stranger offering his hand. She swallowed hard. "You would do this? For someone you do not know." He inclined his head. "For a woman who deserves better than disgrace." She looked to her father, who nodded once, desperate to end the spectacle. Then back to the captain, this man who had appeared like Providence itself. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. His palm was calloused and warm. The church fell utterly silent. The vicar, uncertain but bound by duty, reopened his book. "Do you, Captain William Drake, take this woman?" "I do," he said before the words had finished. "And do you, Lady Marianne Ashcroft?" She hesitated only a heartbeat. "I do." When the vows were spoken and the rings exchanged, a murmur ran through the guests, a mixture of shock, awe, and perhaps a hint of admiration. The captain did not kiss her hand, only bowed over it. His voice, low enough that only she could hear, said, "You are safe now." As they walked down the aisle together, the organ played uncertainly, its notes quivering like the bride's heart. She had been left at the altar, and yet somehow she was not alone. Outside, the rain had stopped. The clouds parted just enough to let one narrow beam of sunlight fall upon the chapel steps, upon the soldier and the lady whose lives had just been bound by chance and courage. The world outside the chapel had never felt so quiet. The guests dispersed like startled birds, whispering of scandal, of disgrace turned miracle. Carriages rattled away into the mist, and on the stone steps of St. Winifred's, Lady Marianne Ashcroft stood with her new husband, a stranger still, though his hand had steadied her through the storm. Rainwater dripped from the captain's uniform, darkening the fabric across his shoulders. His hair clung to his brow, his jaw tense but calm. He turned to her, eyes level with hers. "You should not be out in this," he said softly. "Allow me to escort you home." The words were simple, but the tone, low, protective, made her heart tighten. Home. The word rang hollow now. The house she'd left that morning had expected a celebration. Now it would welcome whispers. I don't know what to say," she managed. "You've saved me from humiliation, yet I didn't do it to save you," he interrupted gently. "I did it because no one else did." Something in his voice made her glance up sharply. Beneath the steel in his tone lay exhaustion, a deep human weariness that did not belong to pride but to pain. He offered his arm, and she, too stunned, to resist, took it. Together they descended the chapel steps as the sky began to clear, the scent of wet roses clinging to the air. Her father followed behind, head bowed in grim silence. When they reached the carriage, he murmured, "Captain Drake, you have done my family a service I can never repay. You have spared my daughter from ruin." William inclined his head. "I ask no repayment, my lord." The Baron hesitated. "Still, this marriage must be made proper before God and law. You'll come to Ashcroft Manor. Papers will be signed." "I'll come," William said simply. Marianne met his gaze again, unsure if she wished to thank him or curse him for turning her world upside down. Inside the carriage, the silence was heavy. She sat across from him, hands clasped tightly in her lap. The rhythm of the wheels filled the void between them. Finally, she whispered, "Why did you step forward? Truly." He looked out the rain-streaked window. "Because I've seen too many promises broken by cowards. I couldn't watch it happen again." "Again?" she echoed. He said nothing more. When they reached the manor, the servants gaped at the sight. Lady Marianne, veiled and pale, with a stranger at her side. Her father ordered chambers prepared, his tone brisk and brittle, and then withdrew, leaving them in an awkward stillness by the parlor fire. Marianne turned to the man who was now, by law and circumstance, her husband. "Captain Drake," she began carefully, "I don't know what the world will make of this. I hardly know what I make of it." He met her gaze evenly. "You owe me no understanding. I won't force you to live as my wife. This arrangement exists only to shield you from gossip. When the scandal fades, I'll leave quietly." Her chest tightened. "You speak as though you intend to vanish." "I do," he replied, his voice low. "My life isn't fit for society's drawing rooms. It belongs to the places people prefer to forget." She wanted to ask what that meant, but his expression closed like a door. He removed his coat, revealing the faint shimmer of a military medal at his chest. Beneath it, the edge of a scar disappeared beneath the collar. "Rest, Lady Marianne," he said softly. "You've endured enough for one day." As he bowed and left the room, she sank into the nearest chair, the enormity of it all pressing down. Married, to a man she'd met less than an hour ago. Saved from disgrace, yet adrift in a new uncertainty. Through the open doorway, she caught sight of him standing in the corridor, speaking quietly with a servant. He moved with a soldier's discipline, his shoulders straight despite exhaustion. There was something solitary in his bearing, an echo of grief that mirrored her own. When he passed beneath the chandelier's light, she saw his hand tremble slightly before he clasped it behind his back. That night, as the house slept, Marianne sat by her window, the moonlight soft upon her gown. Below, she saw him in the garden, standing motionless in the cold, staring at the horizon as if searching for ghosts. He had rescued her from ruin, yes, but something told her he was fighting his own. She whispered to the empty room, "Who are you, Captain Drake, and what pain made you so brave?" The only answer was the quiet sigh of wind through the trees, gentle but heavy with secrets yet to be told. Morning broke cold and silver over Ashcroft Manor. The fog still clung to the gardens, wrapping the hedges in a veil as delicate as lace. Inside, the grand house stirred to life, the crackle of fire in the drawing room, the murmur of servants uncertain how to address their mistress and her unexpected husband. Lady Marianne Ashcroft awoke with a start. For a moment she forgot everything, the altar, the whispers, the soldier's steady hand. Then it came back like the slow toll of a bell. She was married, not to Edmund Harrow, the man she'd been promised to, but to a stranger who had spoken only a dozen sentences to her before vowing his life beside hers. In the corridor outside, she could hear his voice, low, even, and commanding, speaking to the butler about the repairs to the roof and the condition of the horses. The sound startled her. This was no idle nobleman playing at chivalry. This was a man used to giving orders and being obeyed. When she finally descended the stairs, she found him in the breakfast room, standing by the tall windows that overlooked the east gardens. The morning light caught on the edge of his uniform, revealing fine stitching at odds with its wear. His hands were clasped behind his back, his posture impeccable despite the obvious fatigue in his shoulders. He turned when she entered. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. Then he inclined his head slightly. "Good morning, my lady." Her pulse fluttered. "Good morning, Captain." He smiled faintly. "If we are to keep up appearances, it would be proper to call me William." Her lips parted, then curved in a small, uncertain smile. "Then you must call me Marianne." The words hung between them like a fragile truce. They took breakfast together, the silence filled only by the ticking of the mantel clock. She stole glances at him between sips of tea, the sharp line of his jaw, the faint scar at his temple, the quiet steadiness in his movements. He spoke little, but when he did, his voice carried a quiet authority that made her feel strangely safe. Finally, she asked the question that had been turning over in her mind all night. "You spoke of seeing too many promises broken. You said you couldn't watch it happen again. Who failed you, Captain?" He looked at her then, eyes unreadable. "A comrade, a friend, someone I trusted with everything." He paused, gaze drifting to the window where sunlight struggled through the fog. "We were stationed near Austerlitz. There was an ambush. He fled. My men didn't." Her throat tightened. "You lost them?" "All of them," he said quietly. "I came home to find no one waiting, no family, no purpose, until—" He trailed off, catching himself, as though he had said too much. "Until yesterday," she finished softly. He met her gaze, the faintest trace of surprise in his eyes. "Yes," he said, "until yesterday." For a long time they sat in silence. The air between them changed, less formal, more human. She saw the pain beneath his calm. He saw the strength behind her gentleness. Later that day they walked the grounds together, if only to avoid the stares of the servants and the whispers from town. The air smelled of wet earth and sea salt. As they moved through the gardens, she found herself speaking more freely than she had in months about her mother's death, her father's debts, her fear of becoming a transaction rather than a daughter. He listened without interruption, his hands clasped behind his back. When she faltered, he said quietly, "You've endured more than you think. Don't let them make you feel small for surviving." The words warmed her like sunlight through mist. No one had ever spoken to her that way, not with pity, but with respect. By the time they reached the fountain at the garden center, she realized she had stopped thinking of him as a stranger, but the peace shattered that evening. A carriage arrived at dusk bearing a letter sealed with the Harrow crest. Her father read it aloud in the drawing room, his voice trembling. Edmund Harrow had written not with apology, but with arrogance, denouncing her public embarrassment and warning that her impulsive marriage had ruined her social standing permanently. Marianne stood rigid as her father's face darkened. William took the letter from his hand, his jaw tightening. "This man disgraced her in public," he said. "He will not do so again in writing." Her father began to protest, but William's tone left no room for debate. "I'll handle it." Later, she saw him in the stables, saddling his horse beneath the lantern light. "You're going to him?" she asked, alarmed. He met her gaze, the storm of his resolve clear in his eyes. "I gave my oath to protect your name. I intend to keep it." She wanted to stop him, But something in his bearing silenced her, the kind of certainty that comes from men who've already survived death once. As he rode into the fog, she stood at the gates, her hands trembling, her heart pounding with something she could not yet name. She had married a stranger, and yet already she feared losing him. The mist rolled low over the moor, soft as breath and heavy with silence. A faint pink glow crept across the horizon, brushing the frost-tipped grass with light. In that hush between night and morning, two riders appeared, one in dark uniform, the other a pale shadow of wealth and arrogance. Captain William Drake dismounted first, his boots sinking into the damp earth. His movements were steady, practiced, as if dawn duels were as familiar to him as breakfast. Across the clearing, Lord Edmund Harrow appeared in immaculate attire, velvet coat, polished boots, and the smug confidence of a man who had never truly suffered. "You've some nerve calling me out, Captain," Edmund said, smirking as his servant opened a mahogany case containing 2 pistols. "Do you fancy yourself her protector now? You've no place in her world." William's gaze was cold. "I have no interest in your world, Lord Harrow, only in your silence." The words cut through the fog like steel. Harrow scoffed. "You married her like a desperate fool, thinking it noble. She was a pawn, nothing more. I should thank you for taking her off my hands." Before the final insult finished leaving his lips, William struck him across the jaw with the back of his glove. The sound cracked through the mist. "This isn't about your games," William said. "You shamed her in front of God and half of London. You'll write your apology and retract your slander, or I'll take satisfaction another way." Edmund dabbed at his bleeding lip, his expression twisting with fury. "You think a soldier's threat frightens me?" William's eyes narrowed. "No, but perhaps the truth will. You may hold a title, Lord Harrow, but I've faced men braver than you, men who died with honor, not excuses." The seconds were chosen, pistols loaded, the rules read. 20 paces stood between them and the kind of fate that ends a man or remakes him. As they turned and walked apart, the rising sun caught the frost and made the moor shimmer gold. William's heartbeat was calm, measured. He had faced death before. It no longer held mystery. But the thought of Marianne, her trembling voice, her defiance, her quiet strength, brought a steadiness that even war could not give him. "Fire!" 2 shots cracked in unison. A crow startled from the trees, its wings scattering the silence. For a long moment, neither man moved. Then Harrow's pistol slipped from his hand. His expression faltered as a bloom of crimson spread across his sleeve. Not fatal, but deep enough to humble him. William lowered his weapon, his stance unwavering. "The next one goes through your pride," he said evenly. Harrow's servant rushed to his side, pale and trembling. "You'll regret this," the wounded man hissed. "No," William replied, holstering the pistol. "You will." He turned his back and mounted his horse without another word. Behind him, Harrow shouted curses that dissolved into the morning air, powerless. Back at Ashcroft Manor, the household had barely stirred when the sound of hooves thundered through the gates. Marianne, unable to sleep, had been pacing the terrace, her shawl clutched tightly against the cold. When she saw him ride through the fog, her breath caught. He dismounted slowly, his uniform streaked with mud, a faint line of blood across his knuckles. "You're hurt," she gasped, rushing forward. "It's not mine," he said simply, his tone quiet but certain. "What happened?" He met her gaze, the firelight from the hall catching in his gray eyes. "Justice," he said, "or something close to it." Her heart twisted. "You could have been killed." "I've already faced death," he said, a weary smile ghosting across his lips. "But losing your honor, that's a different kind of death, one I wouldn't wish on anyone." For the first time since their marriage, Marianne reached for his hand. He hesitated, then let her fingers close around his. His skin was rough, scarred, but warm. "Thank you," she whispered, "for fighting when I couldn't." He studied her, as though searching for disbelief or fear, but found only sincerity. "You shouldn't thank me," he murmured. "It wasn't heroism. It was instinct." "Instinct," he nodded. "To protect what feels worth protecting." The air between them thickened, heavy with something unnamed. Her pulse raced, his breath slowed. Before either could speak again, a servant entered, announcing that her father wished to see them both. William stepped back, the soldier's composure sliding back into place, but as they walked through the corridors together, his hand brushed hers once, so slight she might have imagined it. And yet, the touch lingered long after. That night, when the house fell silent, Marianne sat by her window once more. The fog had lifted entirely. She could see the gardens, the fountain, the faint path where his boots had tracked mud earlier that day. Somewhere deep in her chest, a truth began to take root. This man who had entered her life by chance was no stranger to loss. But perhaps he was the only one who could teach her how to live again. The manor glowed with quiet candlelight that evening, the storm outside pressing against the windows like a restless spirit. Dinner had long ended, yet Lady Marianne Ashcroft found herself pacing the drawing room, unable to rest. Her father had retired early, muttering about propriety and appearances, but she could not stop thinking of Captain William Drake, of the duel, of his calm courage, of the moment his hand brushed hers. A log cracked in the hearth, sending sparks into the dim room. The sound made her turn. He stood in the doorway, still in his uniform, the faintest sheen of rain across his shoulders. "I didn't mean to startle you," he said softly. "You didn't." Her voice came out quieter than she intended. "I only thought you might be asleep after everything." "I couldn't," he replied, stepping inside. "Too much noise in my head, the kind that doesn't fade, even in silence." Marianne hesitated, then gestured toward the fire. "Then sit. The house feels less haunted when there's company." He smiled faintly, barely a curve of the lips, but enough to soften the sharpness of his face. He sat across from her, the fire painting his features in shades of gold and shadow. For a while neither spoke. The crackling of the flames filled the room, a quiet rhythm between them. Then she said, "You risked your life today. For me." He looked into the fire, his jaw tightening. "I've risked my life for men who didn't deserve it. At least this time, it meant something." Marianne leaned forward slightly, her voice trembling. "You keep saying things like that, as if your life doesn't hold value." He exhaled, long and tired. "It's not that it lacks value. It's that it's already been spent. I left too much of it on battlefields no one remembers." His words silenced her. The firelight caught on the faint lines near his eyes, the mark of sleepless years. She saw in that flicker not just a soldier, but a man carrying ghosts too heavy for one soul. "What was it like?" she asked quietly. He glanced at her. "War," she nodded. He hesitated before answering, as if pulling the memory from a wound. "Loud, endless, every dawn the same prayer that the man beside you would see another night, and when he didn't, you stopped praying altogether." She lowered her gaze. "You've lost much." He gave a small, humorless laugh, "and gained a scar for every name I remember." Marianne looked up again, her heart aching. "Then perhaps you're due for something different." He tilted his head slightly. "Different?" "Something alive, something kind." Their eyes met and the air seemed to still. For the first time, he did not look away. In the flickering firelight, she saw his guard falter, just a breath's worth of vulnerability. "You shouldn't speak kindly to me, Marianne," he murmured. "You don't know who I am when the uniform fades." "Then let me," she said softly. "Let me learn." The room fell silent again, but it was no longer an empty quiet. It was charged, fragile, intimate. He leaned back, the light catching the scar along his temple. "I never thought I'd speak of the war again. You have a way of making silence feel less like punishment." "And you," she said gently, "make me feel safe for the first time in years." He looked at her then, really looked. The lonely daughter of a fading family, once scorned and discarded, now sitting before him with eyes full of warmth. For a heartbeat, he forgot every vow to keep his heart closed. He rose as if to leave, but stopped beside her chair. His shadow stretched long across the rug, flickering with the light. "If I overstep—" "You won't," she whispered. Something unspoken passed between them, an understanding deeper than words. He took her hand then, slowly, reverently, as though afraid she might vanish. Her fingers trembled, but she did not pull away. The warmth of his skin against hers sent a shiver through her chest, not of fear, but recognition. Marianne, he said quietly. I've lived through 100 storms, but none have shaken me like you. The confession hung in the air, fragile and real. When he finally left her side that night, she remained by the fire, heart racing, fingers still tingling where his had been. She knew the world would never understand what was growing between them. A union, born of accident, bound by compassion, now blooming into something fierce and undeniable. Outside, thunder rolled across the hills, but within those walls, something new had taken root. For the first time since she'd been left at the altar, Marianne no longer felt abandoned. For the first time since the war, William no longer felt alone, and though neither spoke the word, both knew. Love had already begun. The morning after the storm broke clean and golden. Sunlight streamed through the high windows of Ashcroft Manor, glinting off silverware and catching on the crystal vases filled with roses. For the first time in weeks, the house felt warm, as though the heavy veil of shame that once hung over it had lifted just slightly. Marianne walked through the gardens in a pale blue gown, her hair unbound, the breeze teasing stray strands into the light. The memory of the night before lingered in her chest, his hand, his voice, the look in his eyes when he said her name. It was too much and yet not enough. She had gone to sleep hearing the echo of it still. You've shaken me, Marianne. She rounded the marble fountain and stopped short. William Drake stood there, no longer in the soldier's uniform she had come to recognize. Instead, he wore a dark navy coat with gold trim, his boots polished, his bearing more regal than she'd ever seen. Two men, messengers by the look of them, waited nearby with horses, their cloaks marked with the royal insignia. He turned when he sensed her presence. You're awake early, he said. I might say the same, she replied, though her voice trembled with curiosity. You look different. He smiled faintly, but there was something distant in it. I suppose I do. The messengers bowed deeply. One stepped forward. Your Grace, he said. The council expects your presence in York by week's end. The letters are prepared, and the estate at Ravensfield awaits your inspection. Your Grace? Marianne repeated, the words catching on her tongue. William turned toward her, his expression calm but apologetic. I had hoped to tell you myself. My father passed last winter. The title fell to me in his absence. Her heart stilled. You're the Duke of Ravensfield, he finished quietly. The world seemed to tilt. The soldier who had stepped forward in a chapel to save her from ruin was no mere captain, but a nobleman, a man of influence and name. He had hidden it, not from shame, but from choice. Why didn't you tell me? She asked softly. Because I wanted you to see me as I was, he said. Not the title, not the fortune, just a man, one who could do something right for once. She stared at him, emotions colliding, disbelief, admiration, hurt, awe. And now? Now, he said, I must return to the life I left behind. The crown demands it. Her throat tightened. And what of this life? Of me? He hesitated, every muscle in his jaw tensing. You are still my wife in name. I would not dishonor that. You would be treated as Duchess, should you wish it. His tone was formal, measured, but his eyes betrayed him. There was pain there, deep and raw, beneath the veneer of duty. I never asked for a title, she whispered. I only wanted honesty. You have it, he said, all of it, even the part that hurts. She turned away, her eyes stinging. So the man who married me from kindness must now leave me for obligation. He closed the distance between them, his voice rough. Marianne, don't make this harder than it already is. Then why does it sound as though it is? She whispered back. Silence, the kind that stretched between them like a wound. Finally he said, If I stay, I risk everything I rebuilt. If I go, I risk everything I've found. The wind stirred her skirts, the roses bowed beneath it, and she understood. He wasn't leaving because he wished to. He was leaving because duty demanded it, and duty had been his master for far too long. He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss against her knuckles, gentle, reverent, final. I will send for you once things are settled. That is a promise. Then he turned and walked away, mounting his horse with a soldier's precision. The hooves struck the gravel sharply, fading into the morning air. Marianne stood where he had left her, one hand still raised where his lips had been. The garden seemed to dim, the sunlight thinning, though the sky remained bright. For the first time since he had appeared in her life, she felt truly alone again. And yet, somewhere deep within her heart, she knew that this was not an ending. It was only the pause before the truth could bloom. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into the soft gray hush of early autumn. The fields beyond Ashcroft Manor burned gold with harvest, yet within the house, silence had settled again. Since the Duke's departure, Marianne had filled her hours with order, helping the servants, reading by the fire, wandering the gardens that now felt too wide, too empty. But each evening, just before sunset, she found herself standing by the window, watching the road that led north toward Ravensfield. It was on one such evening that the first letter arrived. The seal bore the crest of the raven and crown, the mark of the Duke of Ravensfield. Her hands trembled as she broke it open. The handwriting was firm, elegant, yet unadorned, every line filled with the quiet restraint that was so very him. My dearest Marianne, I have arrived safely at Ravensfield. The estate is colder than I remember, and yet I find it easier to breathe when I think of you. The council meets endlessly, debating matters that seem trivial after what we've seen. But in every face, I look for something of yours, honesty, warmth, truth, and find it nowhere. If it is not improper, I would ask that you write. The nights here are long, and your words might keep them from feeling so hollow. Yours, W. Marianne pressed the letter to her chest, her breath catching. The simple words carried more weight than any poem could. She read it 3 times before setting her pen to paper. Her reply was shorter but honest. You left this house quieter than before, and yet it hums with something I can't name. I walk the gardens daily, though they feel emptier without your shadow beside mine. You asked for honesty, so here it is. I miss you. Be safe, William. M. And thus began the exchange. Each week a new letter would come, sometimes brief, sometimes full of restless thoughts written in haste. He told her of the sea cliffs beyond Ravensfield, where he rode at dawn to find silence, of his late father's study filled with dust and memories, of the weight of titles and decisions he'd never wanted. She told him of the roses that refused to bloom after the first frost, of her father's declining health, of the quiet ache of the empty chair across from hers. They never once spoke of love, yet every line trembled with it. You would laugh to see me now, Marianne, he wrote once. The Duke of Ravensfield, tamed by parchment and ink. I find I would rather face an army than a day without your letters. And she had replied, smiling through tears, Then I shall keep your army at bay, one word at a time. Months passed this way, until the distance between them began to feel less like separation and more like an invisible thread, thin, unbreakable, connecting heart to heart across counties and silence. Then, one morning, everything changed. A messenger arrived, his cloak torn by wind, his face pale. He bore a sealed envelope marked with the crest of Lord Harrow, the same man who had once humiliated her at the altar. Her father, too weak to rise, urged her to open it. Her fingers shook as she unfolded the letter. The words leapt out like poison. My dear Lady Ashcroft, you must be quite proud of your charade, but word has reached me that your so-called husband is not as devoted as he appears. The Duke of Ravensfield has been seen in the company of Lady Evelyn Marchmont, an heiress of great fortune and a suitable match for his new title. I thought you should hear it from me first. Consider this my parting courtesy. The paper trembled in her grasp. For a moment she could not breathe. Then anger flared, sharp, blinding, born not of jealousy but betrayal of trust. Could it be true? Had she misread his letters, his vows, his eyes? Her father called her name, but she could not answer. She stood and fled the room, her skirts whispering across the marble floors. Outside, the sky was heavy with approaching rain. That night, she did not write. For the first time since he had left, the quill remained untouched, and though she told herself she would wait for the truth, her heart whispered a quieter fear that she already knew it. The rain came before dawn, sweeping across the fields like a gray veil. By the time Marianne stepped into the carriage, the world was washed in mist. She clutched William's last letter to her chest, the ink slightly faded, the edges worn from rereading, and told herself it might be the last one she ever held. She had made her decision in the silence of the night. She would not sit idle, waiting for whispers to define her life again. She had been left at an altar once, humiliated, voiceless, and she would not live that way a second time. When the coachman asked her destination, she met his eyes and said firmly, "Ravensfield Hall." The journey north took 2 days, the air growing colder with each mile. The countryside turned wild and vast, the hills rising like watchful giants over the moors. As the carriage climbed the final stretch of road, the great estate of Ravensfield appeared through the fog. Dark stone walls, high battlements, and the black banners of the house crest whipping in the wind. It was everything one might expect of a duke's domain, imposing, grand, and utterly lonely. When the doors opened, the butler nearly dropped his ledger at the sight of her. "Your Grace, Lady Ravensfield?" he stammered, unsure of her status. "I am Lady Drake," she said quietly, steadying herself. "Announce me to his Grace." The man bowed deeply. "He is in the west wing, my lady, the study overlooking the gardens." Her steps echoed through the halls, past portraits of stern ancestors whose painted eyes followed her with judgment. Each step tightened the knot in her stomach. What if the rumors were true? What if she found him not as she remembered, gentle, sincere, wounded, but changed by title and expectation? Outside the study she heard laughter, a woman's voice, soft and lilting, the kind that pierced like a needle when one stands in doubt. Her breath caught. She hesitated, then knocked once. The door opened to reveal Lady Evelyn Marchmont, golden-haired, elegant, draped in silk the color of pearl. Surprise flashed across her face, followed by something Marianne recognized too easily. Pity. "Oh," the lady murmured, "you must be the wife." Marianne's spine straightened. "I am." Before Evelyn could reply, William appeared from behind the desk, his expression freezing at the sight of her. For a moment the air seemed to vanish between them. "Marianne," he breathed, stepping forward, "what are you doing here?" "I might ask the same," she said, her voice trembling only slightly. "I received a letter, one claiming that your heart had found another. I needed to hear the truth from you, not from gossip." Lady Evelyn glanced between them, sensing tension too thick for comfort. "I'll leave you to your matters, your Grace." Her departure was graceful, though not without the smug curve of someone pleased to have caused pain. When the door closed, silence fell. Only the rain against the windows filled it. William crossed the room slowly, his expression unreadable. "You shouldn't have come all this way alone." "I shouldn't have been given reason to," she replied sharply. "Tell me, William, is it true?" He stared at her for a long time, then sighed, a sound of exhaustion, not guilt. "Evelyn is the daughter of a councilman. They've been pressing for a political alliance. I entertained her company because diplomacy demanded it, nothing more." Her chest ached with both relief and shame. "Then why not tell me?" "Because," he said softly, "every letter I wrote was the only part of my life that felt real. I didn't want politics to stain it. I wanted to protect that small piece of peace you gave me." The anger in her eyes wavered. "And what am I to you, truly?" He stepped closer, his voice low and rough. "You are the only thing I've done without duty, the only choice I ever made for myself." Tears blurred her vision, but she refused to look away. "Then why does it still feel as though I'm losing you?" He reached for her hand, his touch trembling. "Because I'm still learning how to keep something I love without destroying it." The word love slipped out before he could stop it. He froze, then drew a ragged breath. "Yes, Marianne, I love you. From the moment you stood at that altar and faced the world alone, I loved you, though I didn't yet understand it." Her resolve broke. The tears fell freely now, her voice trembling between disbelief and relief. "Say it again." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing her tears away. "I love you," he whispered, "and if I've failed to show it, it's only because I've spent my life fearing it." Their foreheads met, the rain hammering against the windows like a heartbeat. The tension that had lived between them since that first day shattered into tenderness. For a long time, neither spoke. They simply stood there, clinging to the only truth that mattered, that love, once found, could survive even the cruelest doubts. When at last she drew back, her smile trembled but true. "Then take me home, William, not to Ashcroft, to wherever we belong." He looked at her as though the world itself had just been returned to him. "You already are home," he said softly. And as he kissed her, slow, reverent, inevitable, the thunder broke outside, not as warning, but as applause. The following weeks passed like the first quiet bloom of spring after a brutal winter. The rain that had haunted Ravensfield Hall gave way to soft sunlight, filtering through tall windows and spilling gold across the marble floors. For the first time in years, laughter returned to those long, echoing corridors, hesitant at first, then brighter, freer. The townsfolk whispered of change. The once fearsome Duke, known for his solitude and his scars, now walked the gardens with his wife each morning, her hand tucked easily into his arm. The servants who had once feared his temper now smiled as he passed. Some swore they'd seen him smile back. Marianne took her place beside him with quiet grace. She did not try to fill the house with grandeur or ostentation. Instead, she filled it with life. She opened the old nursery and invited children from the village to learn their letters there. She tended the greenhouse herself, coaxing color from vines that had long withered. The halls that once echoed with silence now carried the hum of music and gentle laughter. One afternoon, she found William in the library, standing by the great window where the late Duke's portrait once hung. He had removed the painting, replacing it with something simple, a seascape, all soft blues and distant light. He turned as she entered, his expression softer than she'd ever seen it. "I was just thinking," he said quietly. "For so long, this house was a tomb. I thought the walls themselves carried grief." "And now?" she asked, moving closer. "Now," he said, smiling faintly. "It feels like it's breathing again." She reached out and touched his arm. "That's because you finally let it." He laughed, a real, unguarded sound, and pulled her gently toward him. "I had help." They stood together in the sunlight, and for a moment, the years of pain and loneliness between them seemed to dissolve. She traced the faint scar along his temple, the mark of his battles, and whispered, "You don't hide it anymore." He shook his head. "Because you taught me it wasn't a wound. It was proof I survived." Her smile trembled. "And perhaps we both did." They were interrupted by a knock at the door, the butler holding a sealed envelope. "A letter, Your Grace, from the Crown Office." William accepted it, breaking the wax seal. As his eyes moved across the page, his expression shifted from tension to surprise. "They've offered me the post at the council permanently," he said slowly. "It would mean travel, long sessions, endless debates." "And?" she prompted gently. He looked up at her, and for once there was no hesitation. "And I think I'll decline." "Decline?" she asked, startled. He nodded, his tone sure. "I've served enough masters. The army, the crown, my title. It's time I served something worth fighting for." Marianne's heart swelled. "And what might that be?" He smiled. "You." She blinked back tears, laughter trembling at the edge of them. "You're a foolish man, William Drake." "Undeniably," he murmured, kissing her hand. "But finally, a happy one." Later that evening, the household gathered in the courtyard as the sun dipped. Behind the hills, lanterns glowed like stars, and music drifted through the warm air. It was a celebration not of power or titles, but of peace, the kind that comes when broken souls find one another and choose to heal together. Marianne stood beside her husband, the Duke, her gown of pale ivory moving softly in the breeze. She caught her reflection in the tall windows, not the frightened bride left at the altar months ago, but a woman who had risen from humiliation to grace. The people bowed as they passed, calling her Your Grace. Yet what mattered more was the way William looked at her, not with ownership or pride, but with reverence. When the first notes of a waltz began, he turned to her and offered his hand. "May I have this dance, Duchess?" Her smile was radiant. "Always." As they danced beneath the lanterns, the servants clapped and the children laughed, and somewhere high above, the moon broke free from the clouds, pale and full, bathing the world in silver light. For the first time in years, the Duke of Ravensfield was no longer haunted by ghosts, and Lady Marianne, once abandoned and broken, had become the heart that taught a wounded man to live again. Night descended softly over Ravensfield Hall, laying its silver hush over the gardens, the fountains, and the fields beyond. The last of the guests had retired, the lanterns burned low, and only the faint sound of the sea wind moved through the trees. Inside, the grand house slept, all except for two figures who lingered beneath the open sky. Marianne and William walked hand in hand through the moonlit gardens, the dew glimmering on the grass like scattered jewels. The roses she had tended now bloomed wildly, their fragrance thick in the cool air. Neither spoke for a long while. They didn't need to. The night itself seemed to breathe with them, calm, content, full. At last, she said quietly, "Do you ever think of that day? The chapel?" He smiled faintly. "Every day. It feels like another life. I still see you standing there, alone but unbroken. I think I fell in love before I ever touched your hand." She laughed softly, her voice trembling. "And I thought you were mad, a soldier interrupting a wedding with words no one expected to hear." "I was mad," he admitted, his thumb brushing the back of her hand. "Mad enough to think I could save a stranger. I didn't realize it was you who would save me." They stopped by the fountain, where the water shimmered in the moonlight. Its soft rhythm echoed the night she first arrived at Ashcroft, frightened and lost. How far she had come. "I used to think my scars made me unworthy," she said quietly. "Not the ones people see, the ones life leaves behind. But now," she looked up at him, her eyes glistening, "now I think they're the reason I could love you properly, because I know what it means to break and still go on." He reached up, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek, his voice low and reverent. "You call them scars. I call them proof that you are stronger than fate itself." A gentle wind swept through the gardens, stirring the ivy and carrying the faint chime of the manor clock striking midnight. He took a slow breath, then looked toward the horizon where the moonlight touched the hills. "There's something I never told you," he said. "The night before the war ended, I made a vow that if I ever returned alive, I would live differently. No more half measures, no more silence. But when I came home, I forgot that promise. I let grief swallow me whole." She stepped closer, her hand finding his chest where his heart beat steady and strong. "And now?" He smiled, faint and tender. "Now I remember. You reminded me." She tilted her head, studying him in the pale light. The soldier who had become a duke, the duke who had become a man reborn. "Then make a new vow," she whispered. "Here, with me." He hesitated only a moment before sinking to one knee, just as he had that first day in the chapel, not out of ceremony, but devotion. "I vow," he said, voice trembling with emotion, "to never again mistake silence for peace. To love you openly, fiercely, without apology. To stand beside you when the world is cruel, and to remind you of your worth when you forget. I vow, Marianne, that whatever storms may come, this time, I will not let go." Her tears fell freely now, glinting like stars. She knelt with him, taking his hands in hers. "And I vow," she said softly, "to never again doubt that love can find even the lost, to walk beside you, not as your shadow, but as your equal, to carry your sorrows as you carry mine, gently, always." The world around them seemed to hold its breath. Then he leaned forward, and their foreheads met, their hands entwined, the night folding around them like a promise kept. Above, the stars burned bright and endless, the fountain whispered, and though there were no witnesses but the moon and the roses, it felt as if the universe itself had paused to listen. When they finally rose, William took her into his arms and kissed her, slow and certain, sealing not just a love, but a life reclaimed. And in that moment, the Duke who once feared love and the woman once left alone at the altar became something neither of them had dared to dream of, whole,